right? So the resurrection is a key topic. So anyway, as we talk about the deity of Christ, is Jesus God? Because that's the question. People, you hear people in conversations, and this is what, I learned this from Rev. Zacharias Ministries, that 90% of the conversations you get into with the skeptic, with the critic, and when it comes down to it, when you get to the smoke screens and the rabbit trails, it's going to come down to the deity of Christ, the authenticity of Scripture, or the concept of absolute truth. Is there such thing as, and they say that 90% plus will come down to one of those three. The deity of Christ, probably the most important. Obviously, the centrality of Christ. Without that, we have nothing.
Absolutely, and the enemy goes after it. That's it. The enemy's primary targets are God, his character, Jesus, his deity, and his resurrection, and the Scriptures, of course, and truth behind all of it, because he's the father of all lies.
Yeah.
Those are the battlefronts, absolutely.
So, one of the main things, we'll knock this one out hopefully right away, is when people say, well, Jesus doesn't even ever says, I am God, right? And so we'll talk about that, and we'll give you some practical things to think about there. But before we do, I want you to text, if you would, if you're interested in getting debunked videos. Also, we've got a bus. If you go to getdebunked.com or debunkedbus.com, you'll see that we bought a 1969 VW bus. We've renovated it. We put a big old TV screen in the back. We just upgraded we have some pretty loud speakers. We just upgraded them so that we go and we do street evangelism. We go street interviews, and we ask people what they think about these things, about the topics that matter. We call it Talk About Things That Matter with People That Care. And we talk about these things, and we say, hey, would you mind watching a short video? And they do, and we call it Mic'd Up, where we video the conversation, and then we'll post it on YouTube and on our website. And so if you want to get that kind of stuff, you just text Stay Bold, one word, STAYBOLD, to 51555. Stay Bold to 51555, and you'll get notifications during the week. And it'll be, hey, we got a new debunked video we're releasing. We just released Evil and Suffering this week.
Amazing. Amazing debunked.
Yeah, and if you've never seen a debunked video, they are amazing. We've got a guy in Southern California, and he's like the, he's a triple threat guy. He's the guy that knows apologetics, production, and just vision about how to reach kids and how to reach young people. It's not for the gray hairs, even though Juan and I both have gray hair. I can see yours in your beard. When I do grow a beard, I have gray hairs, but I think we both get it because we love this kind of stuff. But the middle school, high school, college age, person, these are really fast. In fact, whenever we play, I just played them I did a teaching at my church last week, and I played the Evil and Suffering. I don't know what I played. Evil and Suffering. Oh no, I played one of the videos. I think it was you don't have to share the gospel, just live your life like
exactly
the Francis of Assisi thing. And it's the funniest thing afterward. The whole sanctuary, they clapped, and it was like you see movies sometimes people clap afterward, and you're like, this is weird, but they clap afterward. And Carl said, that's every place he goes they do that.
That's the reaction. That's a typical reaction. Absolutely.
That's a wild thing. So that's how good these videos are. You'd like to share with your friends, but they really hit the key points in a very quick pace, and they're very content rich. So Debunked Tour, we're taking that bus up the East Coast this summer. I think it'll be up there till October. We're going to come back down, and we want to make those things available. We really want to show you. We want to show Christians every place that look. It's usually about the same 20 conversations you're going to have, and the answers are, you can use logic and history and common sense and just in the Bible. And there's this. It's really having a conversation where you're not at each other. Let's have a conversation about this. It's
just a friendly, amicable dialogue.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's a good and healthy thing. And the really cool thing is everything, all these things support the reality that we live in, that there's a really God, that Jesus Christ is God, and that there's heaven and hell, and the whole story, Genesis, Revelation, the whole narrative's in there. So let's talk about the deity of Christ. Now, as far as, the one thing that people always say, the one thing I think I probably hear the most, I don't know about you, is, well, Jesus never claims to be God. Now, I've got my own response for that. I go to John 8:58, and as a matter of fact, I'll turn to John chapter 8 right now. But
that's a very common claim. What I've heard it say, he never claimed to be God. That wasn't really until the Council of Nicaea when he was declared God by the church, and from then forth, but he never really pretended to be God. I've heard that a lot.
Now, here's the funny thing. I've done this study a couple times. It's been a long time since I've taken part in this, but you can count. I think it's 26 times in the New Testament where in different ways he claims to be God. And you got to think again, who's the audience? The audience is Jewish people. It's that culture, and it's that culture raised on that they buy into the Old Testament. They buy into Moses and And the whole thing, the whole story, and whether they are Orthodox or they're liberal in their society, it's still the foundation of their culture, right? Everybody knows what the story is, right? And so that's the audience. But let's look at this here. You got Jesus talking here. He's saying, Jews answered to him. This is John 8:48, and it says, Jews answered and said to him, do we say rightly that you're Samaritan, you have a demon? Jesus said, I do not have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. And I do not seek my own glory. There is one who seeks and judges. Most assuredly I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never see death. Then the Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham is dead, and the prophets, and you say, if anyone keeps my word, he shall never taste death. Are you greater than our father Abraham, who's dead, and the prophets who are dead? And who do you make yourself out to be? And Jesus answered and says, very tactfully, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. It is my Father who honors me, of whom you say that he's your God. Yet I have not known him, yet you have not known him, but I know him. And if I say I do not know him, I shall be a liar. Here's the tact. I shall be a liar just like you, right? But I do know him and keep his word. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Then the Jews said to him, you're not 50 years old, and have you seen Abraham? And here it is, Jesus 8:58. Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. And that's a reference to, if you've seen the movie The Ten Commandments, Yul Brynner, or I think they have a newer one. I don't know if they said it in the new one. It's Exodus 3:14.
Absolutely, I am. It's an amazing statement.
Yeah, it's an amazing. So now in case you're curious what that is, in the book of Exodus, it's Exodus 3:14. Here's when God commands Moses to go to Pharaoh, and he says, "What? Who do I tell him? Who should I tell him sent me?" And he says, "Tell him I am that I am sent you." Right?
Exactly.
And so that's the name of God. Every Jew is very clear about what that happens. So what happens next is, that the priest tears his clothes and he dumps ashes in his head, and that's a sign of the righteous indignation and saying, you've blasphemed, right? You've claimed to be God. And every time every time we miss it, the risk, the Christians running through the New Testament and the Gospels, every time we miss this, just look at the Pharisees, look at the religious leaders of the day. When they get really upset, that's a cue, that's a clue, right? And a cue to say, hey, what's he claiming here? They're not missing it.
No, absolutely. And I think for our listeners, a real practical way to focus this question of whether Jesus ever claimed to be God is just read the Gospel of John. I mean, in Matthew and Mark and in Luke, he does it. But in the Gospel of John, it's like everywhere because it's part of the purpose of John writing the entire Gospel, as he himself says, that people would see these signs and understand that Jesus was Lord. Chapter 8, where you just mentioned, is an amazing statement. I am. If you go through the Gospel of John, you find all the I am statements, and all of them are deity claims. Chapter 10, I love chapter 10 because it says Jesus was in Jerusalem during the Hanukkah, a festival of dedication. He was in the temple, and the people were come on, Jesus, how long are you going to keep us in suspense? And are you the Messiah? If you are, just tell us.
Tell us plainly. Yeah.
Just tell us plainly. And Jesus replied to them. He says, I already told you, but you don't believe me. I already told you, but you don't believe me. And then he goes on to an explanation, and he tells them the things that he can do that only God can do. He says, I give them eternal life, and they will never perish. No one can snatch them away from me, for my Father has given them to me. And then at the end in verse 30, he says, the Father and I are one. One and the same is the meaning. And you know what? The Jews understood it. They understood it because the very next verse says they picked up stones to kill him because he has blasphemed. He claims to be God. And you get this over and over again in the Gospel of John, in addition to the other Gospels. But if you're a Christian and you want to be able to answer this question, just become familiar with the Gospel of John. It's pretty amazing how he just goes, again and again and again and again through the deity of Christ. It's the purpose of his book, as he himself says.
I love this. It's in all the Gospels, but it says, why does this man speak blasphemies like this? Who can forgive sins but God alone? They knew exactly what he was saying. The Jews knew exactly what Jesus was claiming when he said this. When Jesus said, I forgive sins, they were real clear on this. So there was no question in the audience's mind. Let me read something real quick here. I want to kind of backtrack for a second. And I did this study. This is a study I found. I was flipping through stuff today. I did this when I was a new believer because I had this real problem about who Jesus was. And it was very personal to me because I knew some smart people. I remember coming back from college, and my best friend's brother, he was a doctor and a lawyer in the city of Miami. He went to Georgetown, became a doctor, and after 2 months later, he said, "I don't like being a doctor anymore." He found out it was for the wrong purposes, and as far as those insurance and just the whole culture didn't like it. So he became a lawyer, which probably wasn't good either. Amazing, real brilliant guy. So and then I remember coming back from college one time. He said, Jesus never probably even existed. That was probably just made up. I mean, these guys just And I thought, man, Rudy's really smart. I said, man, and that did it for me. I was like, for a couple of years, I was just like, Jesus probably never existed. There's never even a person I guess there was a person named Jesus, but they just kind of made it up and added these things to him. So I started doing this study as I came to this place where I was really being skeptical about God and the Bible and stuff. I went through this own study myself, and I don't know how long this took me to put this together, but it took me a little while. And I remember I read More Than a Carpenter, of course, Josh McDowell's classic about who Jesus was. He said, the whole theme of his book is he's liar, Lord, or lunatic. He's a liar, right, about what he's claiming to be and claiming to be God, and the whole shoot match, filling all the messianic prophecies, or he's a lunatic, because who will claim that who's not, or he's Lord. I actually add a fourth thing to that, Lord, liar, lunatic, or what's my fourth L word? I got it written down someplace. Well, I don't know where it is.
And that's a classic C.S. Lewis argument from Mere Christianity.
The same three?
No, that's
Lord, liar, lunatic?
Yes, absolutely. That's C.S. Lewis and Mere Christianity.
McDowell didn't come up with that?
No, he was quoting C.S. Lewis.
Okay.
But it's a powerful argument, because if you're the argument is, if you're a good teacher, Jesus was a good teacher. I'm willing to accept that he was a good teacher, but he wasn't really God, and he knew this. So good teachers don't go around telling people they're God if they're not God.
Well, that's what pretty much every other worldview, every other religion, they look at Jesus and say, well, he was a great prophet and a great teacher. Really? And he was claiming to be God?
C.S. Lewis was very clear. That's the only option he doesn't leave available to you.
Right.
Because
he couldn't have been a great teacher.
No.
Right.
If he was lying or a lunatic, he's not a good teacher. And if he was telling the truth, he's God. So.
Well, I wrote this in my study. I titled "Who is Jesus?" and I wrote underneath it in handwriting, "God's linchpin, the deity of Christ." And here's the quote from Josh McDowell from More Than a Carpenter: "Jesus is the most influential life ever lived on this planet, and everyone seems to have something to say about him. Why is it that you can talk about God and nobody gets upset? But as soon as you mention Jesus, people so often want to stop the conversation. Why don't the names Buddha, Muhammad, Confucius offend people? The reason is that these others didn't claim to be God, but Jesus did, right? And, why do people, and I wrote this down, question, why do people use his name to curse and not other religious leaders? You never, hit your thumb with the hammer and go, Buddha, it's like, it's Jesus, right? It's and it's other cultures like that too. They say that. So
man, I think I'm going to start doing that every time I hit myself. Muhammad.
So, and the answer I came up with is in Philippians 2:9. It said he has been given the name above all other names, right? And so the class that you just said, great teacher, prophet. Buddhists believe he was an enlightened teacher. Muslims say he was merely a great prophet. They obviously have not studied his most basic teachings or prophecies, for he claimed equality with God, and he is the only way to eternal life. And then I come down to this part where, what did Jesus say about himself? And that's kind of the thing where, as you examine the deity of Christ, you go through the different pieces of that puzzle. One of them is, what was his self-understanding? What did he think and say and claim about himself? What did his contemporaries, what did his followers think who he was, right? Peter, who do you say that I am, all right? What about the hostile witnesses? Of course, you have the Romans, the Jews, you have the other historians, Tacitus, Josephus. You have all these different people who have no vested interest in making Christianity true. In fact, if anything, they were enemies of Christianity, or they're just trying to report history. And so, you check all those things out. That's part of the I mean, I'm talking Mr. Critical Thinking here. What's the name of your critical thinking book?
How to Think.
How to Think. There, I love it. But we got to do a session in Debunked on one session. We're just going to go over your book and how to think. Critical thinking is such a key these days. People don't critical think. I mean, when we were kids, I used to memorize. I had like 15, 20 phone numbers memorized, right? And these days, no one knows. People don't know their own phone number, let alone someone else's. They don't know any information because they can ask Google or Siri or something. But you've taken that back and said, hey, let's go back and stop regurgitating and lapping up stuff that we hear on HBO and the modern day poets, right? Who are the musicians? Who's the girl? Katy Perry and whoever these people are, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Lady Gaga, and I'm sure they're very nice people, but their lyrics are yet to be much to be desired there, right? As far as influencing our kids. So anyway, let's do an episode on that. But what did Jesus say about himself, right? He says, how long do you keep us in doubt? That's the verse you just told us about. That's in John 10:30. And let's see. Okay, this is Luke 5:20, through 21. That's who can forgive sins but God alone. So it's the same conversation we just had, but it's basically, you go through the study and you see there's so many scriptures where Jesus claims to be God, and it's either him or someone else making that claim, the disciples. So it's not something that was recognized years later. It's not something that that the modern church is making up. Like a lot of here's the funny thing. When I asked my friend about Jesus and tell me about Jesus, and he said there's no such person. You have guys like Bart Ehrman, and you have guys like some of the biggest critics of the Bible who teach biblical studies, who teach New Testament studies, who are literally scholars of the New Testament, but are atheists, and they're teaching at universities, bestsellers. And they say, of course, there's a person named Jesus. Of course, there was claims that he was resurrected. These, Uncle Joe at Thanksgiving and the guy you work with don't think this. They'll say those things. But it's funny because the most prominent atheistic scholars in the world recognize these claims.
Well, here's the deal: the claim that Jesus did not exist is probably one of the most ignorant claims a person can make. Not only theologically, but just historically. Historically, it's an established fact. I mean, you will not find a single serious scholarly historian that would say Jesus didn't exist. And like you say, for Bart Ehrman at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, who's written 5 or 6 or 10 books on here's what Jesus said, here's what he didn't say, he's the kind of scholar that really wants to show that Jesus is not God. Don't follow him. You're wasting your time if you're a Christian. Nothing would make him happier than Jesus not existing.
Yeah.
And he says, look, we can't go there. We can't go there. The guy exists. He's on record saying that in debates. He's on record writing that in his books. As much as he would like it, the contrary to be the case, he does exist. He did live. It's a historical fact. Now what people conspire and question and debate is whether he was God, whether in fact he did rise from the dead again. I mean, I know that, in our next program, we're going to cover the resurrection. But just this week, somebody sent me a text and said, hey, I was sharing with somebody about Jesus, and he told me if I had ever seen The Passover Plot, which is a movie and based on a book by a guy it's a conspiracy theory that, Jesus never really died on the cross. What he did was he took the special drug that, makes you seem like you're dead, and that's been available from the Orient for a long time, and he faked his own death, but he really wasn't dead. Now, if you're a critical thinker, you say, okay, wait a minute. So if he didn't die, then how did he survive? How did he survive those nails that were not, sterilized nails in his main blood vessels? How did he survive the spear to the side of his, puncturing his lung? How did he survive 3 days without eating in the cave after being beaten near to his death? And, how did the Romans take him off the cross if he was? It's just one thing after another, plus all the miracles he did. If he's not God, and how did he do all these miracles? And there's just so many problems with that conspiracy theory. But like any conspiracy theory, you can't prove it's wrong because a conspiracy theory doesn't require any evidence.
Well, it takes a lot of imagination to say something like that, and it takes also a lot of faith to believe something like that. I mean, basically, you just listed a whole bunch of things that, how do you survive all these things? Guess what? The Romans, they weren't like a bunch of bumbling fools like you might see in some kind of cartoon. These guys were experts at death. That's what they did. They were experts at keeping justice. In fact, you come into a city that's either a Roman city or it's been conquered by Rome, and they crucify people on the entrances to the city, so that when you're walking in, you look at it and go, okay, everybody, on your best behavior right now. Everybody get in line, family, kids, no messing around. Everyone, it's like, what they're saying is it's literally a crucifixion of people, of criminals on the outskirts of the city, the entrances. It's like a billboard saying, don't mess around. And because there's people, they're naked, their eyes are being plucked out by birds. No one, in history, nobody survives crucifixion. It just doesn't happen.
No, of course not.
Yeah, and obviously with the amount of scrutiny and media coverage, so to speak, that Jesus' crucifixion got. Yeah, there's no anyway. But yes, that you even have guys like Bart, all the top secular atheists that are just that are New Testament scholars. They look at that and go, "Come on, guys, be serious. Of course there was Jesus. Of course he was crucified. Of course he was, all these. Of course these people, the witnesses, the 500 witnesses, they thought they saw the risen, the resurrected Christ." And so, So let's take a look at hostile witnesses for a second. And this is one of my favorites. This is from the Jewish the Babylonian Talmud. And this is a commentary on the Old Testament from Jewish people, from rabbis. And so they can't just ignore this, the historical account of Jesus, dying in the Passover, being crucified, resurrecting. They can't ignore it because it wasn't something, the Bible says, it wasn't something done in a corner. Everyone saw this.
It was done publicly.
It was on CNN and Fox News and the whole thing, and all the newspapers had it, headline, the National Enquirer, the Miami Herald, the whole bit. Everybody knew about it. No one didn't know about it. And that gets passed down. Now, as it's passed down, they had to comment on it. So here's what it says about Jesus in the Babylonian Talmud. This is written by rabbis. By the way, they would like to have ignored and forgotten about this, but they couldn't. They had to address it. You can't just, hey, we're not going to talk about that. You have to address it. Here's them addressing it. On the eve of the Passover, Jesus was hanged on a cross. For 40 days before the execution took place, a herald went forth and cried, "He is going forth to be stoned because he has practiced sorcery and enticed and led Israel astray. Anyone who can say anything in his favor, let him come forward and plead on his behalf." But since nothing was brought forward in his favor, he was hanged on the eve of the Passover. Now you can look that up in the Babylonian Talmud, and one of my favorite books on this is it's actually Norman Geisler's the Encyclopedia of Christian Apologetics, and you can you look up everything by topics there. But he lists Tacitus and Pliny the Younger and Flavius Josephus and Talmud, and there's 10 to 15, maybe even more, hostile witnesses. Different historians who say these are the facts. This is history. The life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the details about Jesus. I mean, if you say that if these things had happened to Jesus, you got to start discounting just about all other parts of history, because the New Testament is so well documented, so much more. I mean, you take the bibliographical test, right? We do that with, we look at documents. When was the original? What's the oldest one we have? When was, from the original, how many copies do we have? How big's the time gap? And how many languages do we have it written in? And all those things attest to, that's how they look into a document. Whoever wrote it. I'm talking about any ancient document in history. The New Testament has 17 times more than any other piece of ancient history as far as, how much we trust it. And that's a literature science test. I remember reading something that James Kennedy posted on his site, and it was about the bibliographical test. And there's a story about a professor in Canada, and he said, well, the New Testament passed these tests, and it's bibliographical tests. And he said, well, then he said, if you don't, a Christian said to him, well, if you don't believe this about Jesus, you have to let go of anything else you know about history. And he says, then that's it. Then I forget everything else in history is discounted. I don't trust any of it. And his assistant yells, "Professor, no!" It's like this big drama, And so,
well, and you can even go to modern hostile witnesses. How many times have we heard the story already of somebody who's upset and they set out to prove that Jesus doesn't exist, and they end up converting to Christianity? I mean, this is not once. This is a story that keeps over and over and over again. I mean, classically, Josh McDowell, and who sets out to prove that Jesus doesn't exist, that he's a fake and a fraud, that he wasn't who he claimed to be. And every single point he set out to prove, he was wrong on. And he found the historical evidence. You have Lee Strobel. Same thing. Wife becomes a Christian. He's all upset. Because
but he's not a good researcher, is he?
No, of course not. He's only,
he's the editor of the legal review for the Chicago Times. He's the king of research. In fact, he edits all the other research that comes in there.
Unbelievable. And he sets out to prove his wife wrong and say, look, you're wasting your time being a Christian. And he didn't like her being a Christian.
Yeah. He didn't understand
it. And what does he end up doing? Becoming a Christian and writing Christian books.
Yeah.
I mean, so the story goes over again. People are hostile. And if you follow the research, if you do the research and you seek the truth, and you respond to it with integrity, you'll end up following Christ.
Here's the interesting thing. You have guys like you said, Josh McDowell and Lee Strobel. These guys, you'd be well pressed to find someone that really knows how to research better than these guys. And so then you find guys like Richard Dawkins. You think, oh, Richard Dawkins is smart, and he's the head of the biology department at Oxford, and wow, he's a really brilliant guy. Well, what's the I always think of this, what's the difference? You have smart people both looking at the same information, and I think it's a matter of the heart for me. And when I look at these guys and say, why did McDowell and Strobel come to this? I think because they weren't looking for, as we say, they were trying to prove Christianity wrong because they wanted their wife back, and I know Josh McDowell was trying to prove it wrong, but he was trying to, he was trying to win over this girl. But I think they're looking at it from, wait a second, this stuff is real. This is history. Lee Strobel says, you go to, as far as the myth of Jesus, he said it takes at least, A.N. Sherman White from Oxford University, the world's, he would go to the expert in every area. Lee Strobel would.
Absolutely.
In the world. He didn't care where he was. This guy's in Oxford, great. This guy's in China, great. I'm going to China. And find out the experts in all these areas, the top people in the world. And so A.N. Sherman White is the guy that said, the professor at Oxford about history and myths, and he said it takes at least 2 to 3 generations for a myth to, from the actual event to be changed and distorted. And the writers of the Gospels, that was first century. That was within 30 to 50 years.
They were eyewitnesses. They're saying, John says, I'm not talking to you about fables. I'm talking about something we saw with our own eyes and heard with our ears and touched with our hands. I mean, this is real. I liken that to, like, if you and I got together, we said, hey, let's do a book on how John F. Kennedy was assassinated with a bow and arrow. And how many copies of that you think we'd sell? Well, it depends how much marketing we have.
Or what news stations we have.
If we have National Geographic market it, we'll probably sell a lot of it. A lot of those books. But anyway, here's the interesting thing you bring up. Okay, we have all these people that were trying to prove Christ was a fake and a fraud, become Christians. But somebody may counter, and I've heard this counter argument, well, what about all the Christians that have become atheists? And there's a bunch of them that have abandoned their faith and become atheists. And so what's the deal there? Well, here's what I found, because I did a lot of research on this. I have found that most of the people that abandon their faith do so for emotional reasons, not intellectual reasons. Mm-hmm. They suffer a death in the family, a loss of a loved one. They suffer from an illness. Something triggers an incredible emotional response where they blame God, and therefore they'd rather believe God does not exist. And not only does that apply to these people that have abandoned their faith, it also applies to a lot of the atheists. You go down the list of the main atheists, the big guys on the block, and many of them have emotional reasons for being atheists, not intellectual reasons.
Well, I know Richard Dawkins was molested as a child, and that was really, that to him said, how could a good and loving God allow this to happen?
Well,
why would he let it?
And you have this guy up in New York University, Michael Shermer, who's editor of Skeptic magazine. This guy just, he doesn't believe. He's a non-believer, but he wasn't always that way. He used to be in a campus ministry that did evangelism.
Well, check it out. Here's one for you. This is from Lee Strobel has a book called The Case for Faith, and here's some handwritten notes I took from this one. There was a guy that was Charles Templeton.
Oh, absolutely.
He was a running mate. He was another great upcoming evangelist with Billy Graham. They were friends. They were cohorts in ministry. And he wrote a book. It was called, it was called Farewell to God, My Reasons for Rejecting the Christian Faith. And in that, he had 2 main issues. It was the exclusivity of Christianity and evil and suffering. And it's those 2 issues, they're hard issues, right? Exclusivity, wait a second. First of all, every worldview claims exclusivity. That one's easy to be dealt with. I just dealt with it in, 4 or 5 seconds?
Yeah, exactly.
Every worldview claims exclusivity. Done. Evil and suffering, yes, that's a tough one. But what this did is this eroded the key concepts for him as he looked at evil and suffering. It kept eroding at the deity of Christ, the validity of the Bible, and even the very existence of God. But when Lee Strobel interviewed him in 1999, one of the things he said, at the end of the interview, he said, I really miss Jesus. So
absolutely.
Kind of an interesting testimony.
Absolutely. And here's the thing. What prompted his crisis of faith was a picture from Time magazine. He saw a picture from Time magazine of a young African mother with her dead baby in her arms. And he could not get over that picture. And he blamed God for it. All God needed to do was send a little rain and that kid would not have died. It's a lot more complicated than that, especially in the part of the world where these pictures were being taken and the incredible crimes committed by the governments of these places. There was so much more to it, but it was emotional. Yeah. Michael Shermer, who I started to tell you, his girlfriend, he was a Christian. He was engaged to a beautiful Christian woman. And they were going to get married. They were actively involved in college ministry and everything. And then she gets hit by a drunk driver. And she's left quadriplegic. Well, that was more than he can handle. He broke off his engagement. He left town, went to New York, and he abandoned his faith in God. it wasn't because there was evidence that Jesus doesn't exist. It isn't because there isn't evidence of Jesus' resurrection. It isn't for any of these reasons. It's because he was brokenhearted and he didn't know how to deal with it. And so, again, if the Bible is very clear, look, we are emotional beings. God made us that way. But we can't let emotions govern our minds and our thinking, because the heart is desperately wicked. That's what the Bible says. It's deceitful. I share that with young people, and they resent it. What do you mean? I go with what my heart says in my heart, and my heart tells me if something's true. To which I say, okay, have you ever been to a sad movie? Yes, okay. So you're sitting there, and somebody dies on the screen, and your heart is broken, and you're crying. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you must know that they said cut. The person got up. He's not dead, got a tremendous paycheck for doing this. Why are you crying? Why are you crying? Why are you brokenhearted? You see, that's what your emotions do to you. Emotions can be manipulated one way or another. That's why we're not saved by how we feel. We're saved by what we know. And so back to the main point, and that's not a rabbit trail, because these people that sought knowledge, sought truth, end up becoming a Christian. And those that abandon their faith don't abandon it because they ran into truth. Mm-hmm. They abandon it because they ran into some emotional crisis that they were not able to handle.
Yeah, that's a tough thing. Now, we talk about hostile. Let's kind of tail up on hostile witnesses here. What about the two parties that were most interested in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus at the time? We had the Jews and you had the Romans, right? And the Romans, look, these guys, the guys who were, there was whatever it was, I don't know, it wasn't a battalion, but it was a number of guards. It wasn't like the two bumbling guards you might see in a cartoon. Oh, I guess he got away, resurrected, and got by us without seeing him. Like they sealed, if you break a Roman seal on anything, they had sealed the tomb. That's a death penalty for whoever's guarding that. It's death penalty for whoever breaks the seal. It's death penalty for the guard who's guarding them. If a prisoner gets away from you, if you're a Roman guard, guess what? You're dead too. So, these guys, so the Romans would have loved to produce a body, right? Resurrected body. And we'll talk about this in more detail, but I just want to talk about as far as the hostile witness portion of it. They were at a loss, right? The Jews would love to produce a body. Both the Romans and the Jews, if they could have produced the dead body of Jesus Christ, that would have ended all the speculation throughout the Jewish world, and all the, Pilate wanted to keep peace. He wasn't caring much more about truth. We can talk about what is truth, but he was really concerned about his own skin, right? He didn't want Caesar to say, getting his daily report and saying, hey, what's going on over there in Pilate's area? He's got in trouble again. Are you serious? Off with his head. He wants peace in his region. So hostile witnesses, man, the people, the people who wanted the dead body to show up, because it wasn't there, and that's Jesus' calling card. That's, we talk about the deity of Christ. The resurrection is how he separated himself from every other claimant to divinity on the face of the planet that has ever been, there ever will be. Right? So that's, if you want to comment on that, I'd like to tie this one up before we move on to the next piece here.
No, it's just we can go on and on about hostile witnesses.
Yeah, that's not okay. So let's talk about this though. Let's talk about miracles for a second. And one of my favorites. This is from, I think this is Josh McDowell. He tells a story about Andre Cole, the magician. He says Andre Cole is the magician of magicians. He's the one that David Copperfield and Chris Angel and all the top who we look at in Vegas and say the top magicians look to Andre Cole. He says Andre Cole is the only magician in the world who can claim he's never been duped by another magician. Now, have you heard this story about this guy?
I have not.
Okay, so Cole is K-O-L-E, Andre Cole, and he's a Christian. Now, he's a Christian because it was either Josh McDowell or another apologist had challenged him. Hey, Andre, we hear you're great at debunking, fake things, and why don't you debunk the miracles of Jesus? And so Andre Cole imagine that you've never been fooled by anybody. He's got over 2,000 patents on magic tricks. He supposedly makes like $100,000 a day on those patents globally from these things. Like he's, the guy's got it going on. Now, he goes and looks at the New Testament and, as a historical document, and he reads through it, and he looks at the extra biblical accounts that we see in all the other places where they're mentioned in history, and he becomes a Christian because he says, listen, I can make an elephant disappear, I can make an airplane disappear, I can make the Statue of Liberty disappear. But in order to do that, I need 2 or 3 semi-truckloads of equipment. I need a whole crew. I need to control the lighting, the wind, all the conditions, but I can do that. Jesus didn't have that. Well, he had some fishermen and some other guys, and really, he fooled come on, he walked on water, he healed people, he rose from the dead. All these, there was so many miracles he did that even the libraries themselves couldn't contain enough, things that were written about the things that he did. He becomes a Christian on that alone, on just the miracles. So, if you want to comment on miracles, I'd like to hear about that.
There's one miracle that we can debunk, and that's the feeding of the 5,000. You see, what Jesus did was he called ahead while the disciples were on the boat. He called ahead, and he ordered fish and bread from all of the bakeries in the area.
They had the delivery service back then.
Yeah, they had over 500 mules loaded with food hidden behind the tree line. And when all the disciples were there and all the multitude, what they did is they had some guy pray for the food. You have to pray for your meal.
Right.
They picked that one guy that nobody wants him to pray for the food because he prayed for half an hour.
Yeah.
So while the guy is praying for everybody's needs and the food, they were able to distribute all the food in front of them without them realizing it. And bingo, you have the feeding of the 5,000.
There you go. And extra.
Huh, absolutely.
Collected up extra back.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, Michael Shermer says that what Jesus did was magic, that Penn and Teller can do all of Jesus' miracles in Vegas. Yeah. Right. I wonder how much Penn and Teller would be making if they could turn water into wine,
well,
huh?
Penn and Teller
what a business.
Learned from Andre Cole, so I can debunk that real quick.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. A lot of people say about the miracles that Jesus did. Now, you see, the resurrection obviously is the linchpin of the gospel. It's the key miracle. But all the other miracles that lead up to that he does, it's everything he does. It's the healing of people. It's turning water to wine. It's all the different, everything you see in the New Testament. And you say to yourself, okay, Muhammad never claimed to do miracles. In fact, if you ask a Muslim about, tell us about the miracles in the Quran, they say the only miracle in the Quran is the Quran. That will be their answer. There are no miracles in the Quran. Muhammad did not do miracles. Okay, and they say he was the greatest and latest and greatest prophet. What about Krishna or Buddha? And these look, these guys, they're not going to have the same claims. They didn't claim to be God. They didn't claim to do miracles. They were people, right? And so the miraculous account, the miraculous faculty, and people say, well, the book is full. Bible say, the skeptic will say, well, the Bible's full of miracles, and look, this is just stories to get your attention. They're nice, and they're trying to show the power of God and this kind of thing. Well, guess what? If you don't have miracles in the Bible, this is the historical account. This is Genesis to Revelation. It's the story of God in mankind. That's what the story is. And here's how God intervenes. When we see that, I love watching the old Ten Commandments, Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston, and the ocean opens up and it closes behind them, and all the Egyptians die in the ocean. You see that and you go, amazing. That's an amazing thing. Did that really happen? Well, yes, the Bible says it happened, right? And then you got, of course, well, how do we know the Bible's true? And then that's a whole other subject. But without miracles, you have a natural story. You don't have anything. Without anything supernatural, you don't have anything super here. It's just a story like any other story. It's the miracles, the miraculous faculty that separates the inspired Word of God from every other piece of literature on the face of the planet.
Absolutely. By the way, I met Yul Brynner.
You did?
In Colombia, yeah. Somebody's a fan. They named their kid Yul Brynner. I asked him if his brother was Charlton Heston, but no.
That would be great.
But you look at this, and people can claim anything they want, but the Bible is just over and over. The veracity, the reliability, it's there, and these miracles did happen. By the way, there's modern day miracles.
Yeah,
that we still can't account for, and we take the wrong approach sometimes, because skeptics will take the wrong approach and try to figure out what's the natural mechanism that explains what happened. There is none. If there was a natural mechanism, it wouldn't be a miracle.
Right. Well, Jonah and the fish, and so of course we know it's not a whale. In the Greek, it's ketos. It's a big fish. But you look at, you can look at Noah and the flood. You can look at David and Goliath, or Jonah and the fish, and you think, oh, these things are just, Adam and Eve. These are miraculous stories. Well, we know Adam and Eve. Now we know scientifically that there's one man and one woman where all mankind came from, and genetically, if you trace the roots of that, and so guess what? That's Adam and Eve.
Didn't you see the news recently of some diver somewhere that got swallowed up by a huge...
Yes, I did. I think I sent that out to you guys. Yeah, it was a diver, I think in Australia. They got a picture of it. This guy gets he gets swallowed by a whale.
And then spit out.
Spit out, right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, he wasn't in it for 3 days. He had equipment. He could have survived longer. But anyway, yes, people do get... these things do happen. But I'm saying miracles happen. That wasn't a miracle. The diver got spit out anyway. He just got spit out. He did get swallowed up by a whale by accident. Let's talk about. I want to read a quote here. This is great. This is from Ravi Zacharias' book, Jesus Among Other Gods, and this is a quote from Napoleon. Not Napoleon Dynamite, the guy who conquered the world, Napoleon. And he said, he called Count Montholon to his side and asked him, "Can you tell me who Jesus Christ was?" The Count declined to respond, and Napoleon countered. He said, "Well, then I will tell you. Alexander, Caesar, Charlemagne, and I myself have founded great empires. But upon what did these creations of our genius depend? Upon force. Jesus alone founded his empire upon love, and to this very day millions will die for him. I think I understand something of human nature, and I tell you, all of these were men, and I am a man. None else is like him. Jesus Christ was more than a man. I've inspired multitudes with such an enthusiastic devotion that they would have died for me. But to do this, it was necessary that I should be visibly present with the electric influence of my looks, my words, my voice. When I saw men and spoke to them, I lighted up the flame of self-devotion in their hearts. Christ alone has succeeded in so raising the mind of man toward the unseen that it becomes insensible to the barriers of time and space." And he goes on to, I'll cut to the chase here because of time, but he says, he asked for the human heart. He will have it entirely to himself. He demands it unconditionally, and forthwith his demand is granted. Wonderful. In defiance of time and space, the soul of man with all its powers and faculties becomes an annexation to the empire of Christ. All who sincerely believe in him experience that remarkable supernatural love toward him. The phenomenon is unaccountable. And this is, here's Napoleon. Here's a guy who's, he's in exile now. He's a pretty smart guy. He's experienced in the world. He's kind of like Solomon, if you will. Like he's had everything. He's a man of experience. He knows mankind and human heart, and he's blown away by the effect that Jesus has over the millennia upon the human heart, about people that will die for him. Right? And
Absolutely.
I really dig that quote.
As we start to wrap up our program today, I want to leave something with the listeners. I want our listeners to understand something. You have to know that you're in the right when everybody wants a piece of Jesus. When the Muslims claim Jesus to be one of their own, they say he didn't get crucified. The guy who carried the cross for him ended up being crucified. He went to Mecca and was a Muslim, became a Muslim.
The Muslim Jesus.
The Buddhists claim that he was the first enlightened one, that he was one of them. Many of the Hindu sects believe that Jesus was a god of the Hindus. When everybody wants a piece of Jesus, that tells you a little bit about.
Well, they all lean on Jesus for credibility too.
Absolutely, it's the attractiveness of who Jesus is, and it's the trust factor here. If Jesus is on your team, then you're on the winning team. You're on the right side of history. And that's you got to keep that in mind. If that doesn't give you confidence, I mean, think about it. Jesus himself said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life, and nobody comes to the Father but by me." Those claims are amazing. And yet you have all of these other people saying, "Yeah, he was one of us. He was one of us. He was one of us. He's on our team. He's on our team. He's on our team." So you can be confident. You can be absolutely confident that Jesus is who he says he is.
Now, I want to ask you this. I love that point, because I say the same thing. And the way I say it when I talk about other religions and other worldviews is everybody leans on Jesus for credibility. You don't see, people talk about Buddhism, and it's great. Most Buddhists don't understand Buddhism. Buddha says he cannot save. Buddhism is not even about God. It's pantheistic. They believe that we're all one drop in the ocean of life, and that's our goal is to attain that. Here's what I want to mention before, just kind of like my final thoughts is I want to talk about messianic prophecy. And as I go through all the different pieces of this puzzle, like I have a teaching I call my cumulative case. And I have 22 pieces of Eric Purtick's worldview on reality, on life, that Christianity is the absolute correct worldview as far as how, what the reality of life is, what corresponds with reality. I also I do the same thing with this as far as, who is Jesus? I take all these pieces, how others saw him, hostile witnesses, miracles, look at in the Old Testament, the Christophanies, Old Testament appearances of Jesus Christ. You see the resurrection, we'll talk about next week, the claims of other religious leaders about Jesus, all these different pieces, and they all point, they're all what we would, in a worldview talk say, they're corresponding lines of evidence. They all point to the same thing. And that's what you'd see, like, who's the guy that wrote Cold Case Christianity?
Yeah, J. Warner Wallace.
Oh, I love that. I love that book. And,
Absolutely.
And he's the same thing as a detective. These are all corresponding. They all point to the same thing.
Multiple lines of attestation.
Multiple
Absolutely.
lines of attestation. I love that term. So here's one thing I want to mention is prophecy. There's Josh McDowell, actually, I heard him number 333 messianic prophecies. You can number, sometimes you see a messianic prophecy, a prophecy of the coming Messiah. It'll be one verse, but it'll have 3 prophecies within it. So you can number any different ways. But let's just say 300 prophecies. The number, if you look at this, and you may have heard this example, if you just take 8 of the 300, any one person in history from the time of Jesus until present, or actually from the time of Moses, from the time of these writings until present, over a 1,600-year period, you have, what's the odds of any one person fulfilling this prophecy? I'm going to go over 8 real quick. Micah 5:2. Though Bethlehem, though you be little among thousands of Judah, yet out of thee shall come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth have been from old, from everlasting. You have Zechariah 9:9. Rejoice, O daughter of Zion, O daughter of Jerusalem. The Messiah is going to come riding upon an ass, upon the foal, the colt, the foal of an ass. He's going to present himself to Jerusalem on a donkey as king. He'll be betrayed for 30 pieces of silver, and that's in Zechariah 11:12. We have the Lord said, "Great, cast unto the potter a goodly price. I was praised for him. I took 30 pieces." He was betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. His wounds in his hands. It says, "Those and what shall we say unto him? What are the wounds in thy hands? Those with which he was wounded in the house of his friends." Okay, so basically, here's the bottom line for this part. You can look at them. If you looked at just the messianic prophecies, this separates it. This is a whole proof by itself. 1/10 to the 17th. That's 1/10 to 17 zeros. Same odds as you taking a silver dollar, putting a red X on it, throwing it in the state of Texas, 2 feet deep with silver dollars, mixing it up really, we'll blindfold you so you can't see where it's at. We'll mix it up really good with a big stick, and same odds of you. That's just 8 of the 300. And when you go up to the next 8, now you got 16. Next in 32,
it's impossible.
It's like pulling an electron out of the universe randomly.
It's impossible.
Yeah. So bottom line is, my bottom line in this whole conversation is, I love the John 8:58, Exodus 3:14, because that's the one that comes most commonly for me, is Jesus claiming to be God. Those two connect. Who do you say that I am? And he says, I am. Jesus claims to be God right there. That's a key part. But the also part for me is the messianic prophecies. Those go above and beyond the scripture, everything corresponding to each other. But that is the proof. That is the undeniable proof. You can't say that somebody fulfills these prophecies and they didn't have any control over them.
Plus, he's somebody you can know.
He's somebody you can know. So we're about out of time, but I love this subject. I like to keep it real for people as far as their personal deepening and widening of their faith, but also just to be ready with a skeptic. There's so many. If you come with an unbiased heart looking for truth, and there's so many resources on this. Do you have a favorite resource?
The Case for Christ and Evidence That Demands a Verdict.
Okay, there you go. I could name them all. I'll go with those. Those are both great.
Those are amazing.
Yeah. So
they're not favorites, but they're just 2 among many, many resources.
All right. Peace out to you guys. Debunked is over for now. We'll see you next week. We'll talk about the resurrection.
You're listening to WAFGLP 107.1 FM, Pompano Beach.